15-year-old Karen Smith vanished into the 1982 night, disappearing from a bus stop after a final parting. Daybreak revealed a tragedy, sparking a decades-long mystery that outlived those who had spent their lives seeking her killer. Yet, a tenacious investigator in California refused to let her story fade into a forgotten archive. When the cold case dossier reached his hands, his exhaustive pursuit finally unburied the long-delayed peace they deserved. In 1982, young Karen left Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for California, hoping for a fresh start with her family. Adjusting to Palo Alto High School, she became a regular on local buses, comfortably navigating her new surroundings. During the evening of September 2nd, a rendezvous at 7-Eleven led to miniature golf and a moonlit walk through Ponderosa Elementary School grounds. Past midnight, her boyfriend escorted her to the bus stop before they retreated into their separate nights. That night, she never made it home. At daybreak, a passing trucker stumbled upon the 15-year-old's remains just 100 yards from that final bus stop. Her killer had discarded her behind a 4-foot, gore-slicked partition, abandoned in the undergrowth like common refuse. Found naked, her wrists had been bound using the sleeves of her own striped shirt. A jacket remained cinched around her left ankle. The autopsy revealed 60-plus puncture wounds, 18 piercing her heart, and evidence of a brutal sexual assault. Her then-boyfriend still vividly recalls hearing the news of her brutal slaying. For nearly 40 years, David Wood lived under a cloud of suspicion, finally exonerated only when modern forensic science outpaced the original investigation. A haunting regret lingered. He had hurried home that evening to avoid missing a curfew, leaving her solitary at the station. In a 2022 email, he spoke of 40 years spent mourning the loss of a beautiful girl he was beginning to love. He expressed hope that this capture would finally offer peace to her family and himself. Solving the case proved agonizingly complex. Even though the assailant left distinct biological signatures, both blood and fluid, at the scene, materials that today would be considered a goldmine of genetic information, the primitive tools of the era offered no path to his identity, leaving the trail cold when the database yielded no results. For 10-year intervals, investigators kept their sights trained on Karen's partner at the time. Yet, forensic proof connecting him to the homicide remained frustratingly absent. A vintage white utility van spotted near the site offered a haunting lead, though it vanished into obscurity, its role in the tragedy unresolved. More than 20 investigators combed through the files for nearly 40 years, yielding almost zero forward momentum. The 15-year-old's father and sibling went to their graves, never knowing the dark reality of her final moments. In 2022, a surprise call from Sunnyvale Detective Matt Hutchinson reached the victim's aunt. Years prior, the detective had quietly committed himself to this forgotten file. The revelation was staggering. The predator was found alive and faced immediate charges for the assault and killing of the girl. To secure the suspect, Hutchinson personally traveled across the Pacific to the shores of Maui. Recently, the press has cast a bright spotlight on Hutchinson's peculiar specialty. He is celebrated for cracking seemingly impossible mysteries, including unmasking the person who took 18-year-old Elelena Mina's life. The young woman was slain during her security shift in 1979. His work also brought justice to a 7-year-old survivor from 1996 and Susan DeLeon's 1969 killer. These victories began in 2014, driven by his realization that many families still inhabit a painful limbo of waiting. His initial encounter with the victim's relatives exposed a deep, audible wound caused by years of official silence and neglect. The situation felt fundamentally wrong. He believes victims deserve remembrance, even though balancing these ancient files with current duties is grueling. Navigating life with a wife and 2 small children makes his heavy investigative workload a delicate balancing act. Nevertheless, he carves out weekly windows to hunt for microscopic details that slip through the fingers of his predecessors. He admits these investigations haunt him, refusing to dissipate even during his nightly commute away from the precinct. Breakthroughs often strike during mundane moments at home, as the weight of these tragedies lingers permanently in his subconscious. He channels this obsession into fuel, keeping the faces of the fallen displayed prominently on his workspace. In 2019, he reopened Karen's case, telling Inside Edition that the investigation had haunted his career for years. The sheer brutality of the attack, combined with decades of agonizing silence for her family, weighs heavily on the soul. He noted that his daily commute served as a grim ritual, taking him past the exact spot where she was discarded. Hutchinson prioritized modernizing the investigation, submitting original biological evidence for advanced forensic sequencing and genetic genealogy profiling at a specialized laboratory. Yet, the initial findings were crushing. The data offered little hope. Only 3 weak leads emerged, pointing toward distant relatives rather than a direct suspect. Technicians warned Hutchinson that these tenuous links made a resolution for Karen's murder statistically improbable. Despite the bleak outlook, the investigator refused to let the setback extinguish his resolve. He reflected that any professional exhaustion he felt paled in comparison to the lifelong trauma endured by the victims. He abandoned self-pity, refocusing his efforts on the cold reality of the case file. The investigation bled into his personal hours. Even after a transfer from the homicide unit, the case remained his obsession. He confessed to the press that the girl's portrait was his anchor during moments of professional fatigue or despair. Her frozen image served as a silent, persistent demand for justice that had been denied for decades. With the family still suspended in grief, he questioned the purpose of his labor, if not to close this file. He pursued the faint trail of distant kin identified by the lab, though the first 2 leads proved to be dead ends. A third contact finally provided the architectural fragments needed to reconstruct a comprehensive lineage. This led him to 4 siblings from Fresno, California. Forensic exclusion quickly narrowed the field by half. He spent several months meticulously analyzing the digital shadows cast by the remaining 2 suspects. The evidence eventually converged on 75-year-old Gary Jean Ramirez, then residing quietly in Maui. Confronted by investigators at his front door, Ramirez offered only a stunned, muttered exclamation of disbelief. Ramirez was raised alongside 3 brothers in a Fresno household that his sibling, Rudy, recalled as deeply fractured. While their father labored for the county, Gary emerged as the clear favorite within the domestic hierarchy. Rudy claimed Gary lacked the typical traits of a violent or troubled adolescent. Rudy relocated to Maui at 18, while his younger brother, Gary, later enlisted in the Air Force. Their paths diverged during the 1980s as Gary stayed in Fresno to care for their mother. In his 30s during the murder, Gary was eventually persuaded by Rudy to migrate to the Hawaiian Islands. He remained there for decades, building a life that included 2 marriages and 2 children. His unremarkable career consisted of varied labor, from pest control to food service. Later, sidelined by a physical injury, he subsided on government assistance and pivoted toward landscape artistry. He possessed no prior criminal history. To local authorities, he was a ghost, appearing entirely law-abiding until genetic evidence unmasked him. This explains his evasion of traditional forensic databases, which typically only profile individuals with previous felony convictions. Rudy expressed profound astonishment to the media upon learning of the charges brought against his sibling. Struggling to reconcile the man he knew with such savagery, Rudy made a public statement. He claimed Gary was a peaceful soul, incapable of even the slightest flash of temper or aggression. By February 2025, the 77-year-old stood before a judge in San Jose. Observers described his admission to first-degree murder as a faint, almost imperceptible whisper in the courtroom. Those surviving loved ones in attendance felt a sharp sting of betrayal, as his no-contest plea allowed him to bypass guilt. They had yearned for the aging man to finally break his silence. They sought a motive, some explanation for why a defenseless child was selected to suffer the consequences of his internal fury. Robin Stitt Morris, the aunt who received the pivotal call regarding the 2022 arrest, spoke out. She emphasized to reporters that genuine resolution requires the defendant to confront the reality of his actions openly. She expressed a desire for a direct explanation, noting that the concept of justice remains frustratingly elusive. He experienced a complete life, a luxury permanently denied to her young niece. Also present was David Wood, the victim's boyfriend from 1982, accompanied by his spouse. The pair consistently traveled 3 hours to monitor the legal process alongside a childhood friend of the victim. Tracy Lancaster remarked on the stolen innocence of their youth, asserting their presence was a final act of loyalty. They attended every court session as silent guardians, ensuring the victim remained more than just a name while the crime's echoes haunted them. They stood there, hoping she could feel their presence as justice was finally served. Acting as proxies for Karen, they witnessed the resolution on May 12, 2025. Ramirez received life, with parole eligibility delayed until his 90s. The suspect first declined to fight charges. Fearing a permanent existence behind bars, he shifted his legal strategy to avoid dying in a cell. Authorities observed that by confessing prematurely, the accused obtained a penalty which, given his seniority, represents an effectively permanent incarceration. Investigator Matthew Hutchinson remains focused on decades-old mysteries, fueled by the psychological victory each closed case provides for his ongoing mission. He currently manages 2 unsolved murders, following fresh trails that promise to finally expose the truth behind these tragedies. Interviewed by Daily Mail in 2024, he emphasized that the true heavy lifting belongs to the relatives who relentlessly struggle to keep the victims' stories from fading into obscurity. Their tenacity preserves the legacy of the fallen, acting as the ultimate catalyst for justice in an often indifferent world. Persistence is vital. Families must realize that their pressure is necessary for investigators to fulfill their duty of resolving these crimes. The evidence remains clear. Viewers are invited to share their perspectives on this dark chapter in the comments section provided below. Audiences are encouraged to support the investigation by engaging with the content. Vigilance remains paramount until the next case study begins. The story of Karen Smith is a harrowing reminder that the shadows of the past never truly vanish. They only wait for a light brave enough to find them. This case is more than a solved mystery. It is a profound testament to the fact that justice has no expiration date. For 40 years, a family lived in the deafening silence of the unknown, carrying a grief that time refused to dull. While the world moved on, the wound remained open. This story teaches us that persistence is the ultimate weapon against indifference. Detective Matt Hutchinson reminds us that cold cases are not just dusty files in an archive. They are human lives, stolen moments, and unfulfilled promises that demand to be remembered. The lesson of the unforgotten. Truth is patient. Evil may hide in the obscurity of decades, but the truth is relentless. Empathy is action. Science gave us the tools, DNA, but it was human empathy that did the heavy lifting. Dignity for the fallen. Closure isn't just a legal status. It's the restoration of dignity to a 15-year-old girl and peace to those who loved her. Let this be a call to action. Never stop seeking the truth. Whether it takes 40 minutes or 40 years, every victim deserves a name, and every family deserves an answer. We must honor the quiet heroes who refuse to let the lost fade into history. Memory is our most sacred duty.